I started writing poetry as soon as I could write when I was maybe 6 years old. And I also started reading poetry at the same time. I wrote because I wanted to express what I saw, what I felt, and how I perceived what was happening around me, which sometimes felt like it was in conflict with how the adults described what was going on. So I also wrote because it was a way to remember things that were important to me. So that was from when I was very small, like 6 years old. And I continued writing, all through my elementary school, middle school, high school years. And then when I went to university, I started taking creative writing classes, and I continued writing poetry. From there, I ended up going and getting a master's of fine arts in poetry at Columbia University here in New York, where I still live. And after I graduated, I made the transition from poetry. I mean, I still write poems from time to time, but I started working on fiction. And I have published 3 novels, and I have written a 4th novel, which I just finished, weeks ago. And I would say all of the novels so far, the 3 novels that have been published and the 4th one that I just finished, are all centered on post-genocide Armenian diaspora experience. The first one was a fictionalized account of my grandmother's life as a genocide survivor and immigrant bride. It's called Zabel. And it was actually translated into Eastern Armenian. The second one was Dreams of Bread and Fire, and it is an account also of a woman's story, someone of my generation growing up in the Armenian community outside Boston, who's half Armenian, half not Armenian, and how she comes to terms with this sort of unspoken history. She also gets involved with a Armenian Marxist-Leninist revolutionary who sets off a bomb in a Turkish Airlines office, which was inspired by things that I had read about Asala, and I was very interested in this character and this chapter in Armenian history. And then the third novel is called All the Light There Was, and it's set in Paris in the Armenian community of Belleville, and it's a story of a young girl growing up whose brother and his friends are involved in the French resistance, and she has to make some difficult choices during and after the war. So that's the third one. And the 4th one that I just finished, I'm not sure exactly when it will be published because I just finished it like 2 weeks ago, is set in the Armenian community of Beirut during the Lebanese Civil War. And it actually opens in New York City on 9/11, with the attack on the World Trade Center. And it's about the response of this young woman and her family, who are Lebanese Armenians, to what's happening in New York City. And then it transports back in time to 1975 to the Lebanese Civil War. And then at the very end of the book, it goes back yet again. The family is from Hajin. They lived in Nor Hajin in Beirut. And then the last section of that last novel is set in Hajin in the Ottoman Empire. It goes sort of works in reverse chronological order. I have felt as though I'm not, maybe this is a funny thing to say, but I'm not super interested in commercial success. I'm actually interested in publishing, and that the publishers sell enough novels, sell enough books of my books, that they're interested in publishing the following one. So I just feel like I have the stories that I want to tell, the stories that are compelling to me, the community that I come from. And I have written other things. I've written poems about different things. I've written essays about, for example, Palestine. I've written essays about, the writing life and so on. But I guess I'm very interested in Armenian diaspora experiences, sort of committing to exploring different varieties of Armenian diaspora experience. And if, I would think there, the American writer James Baldwin, there's a quotation from him that I feel is very close to my heart, which is, the responsibility of a writer is to excavate the experience of the people who produced him. I do think that there is interest in the United States in ethnic experiences, but as sometimes it runs in whatever is in fashion at the time. So it could be, I remember when Zabel was published, Arundhati Roy's first book, The God of Small Things, was a massive international bestseller. And because of the success of that book, all of a sudden publishers were very interested in finding the next Arundhati Roy. And so there were many other books by Indian and Indian American writers that were published. And there are Latin American, phase where Latin American writing was very popular. Then you have certain, for example, Nigerian American writers who have had big commercial success, and then all of a sudden you'll find 3 or 4 other Nigerian American novels that are, coming up from the publishers. I wish I had pulled it. I have a quotation from Allen Ginsberg where he says something like, if you want your voice to be heard, you have to not pay attention to anyone else, and you have to become a saint of your own voice or a saint of your own experience. And it was funny because my editor asked me when I was telling her about my 4th novel, and it takes me a long time to do books. Sometimes it's 5 years, 6 years. It's 8 years between the last book and this one. I'm a very slow writer. And my editor asked me, well, what would you compare it to? What would you compare your new book to? Meaning, can you think of some popular fiction that's been published that we can compare your book to and say, oh, it's like the Armenian whatever, as a way to, as a marketing hook. And it's very, I guess maybe because I'm financially secure and I don't have to worry about, how many copies it's going to sell beyond selling enough that the publisher wants to do my next book. I just said, it's really kind of like my previous 3 books. It's kind of the same kind of writing, character-driven literary fiction set in the Armenian community about post-genocide Armenian diaspora experience. So I don't know, maybe with the last one, with the one that was set in World War II, the publisher compared it to, other historical fiction written by women that was set during World War II. Because I guess there's always the problem of marketing. I think that Armenians around the world, whether in Hayastan or Lebanon or Aleppo or in New York City, wherever, that there is this intergenerational transmission of trauma that dates back, to the genocide. And I would say even in my family's case, my grandfather was a survivor of the 1909 Adana massacres. So it even goes back that far. And, I think that writing can serve a sort of cathartic and healing and therapeutic process. And for that reason, I think that everyone, should write, whether or not it's for publication, whether or not, it's for a bigger audience. But I think that literature has to have maybe a little bit of distance from the experience of the trauma in order to be able to transform it into art. I'm not 100% sure I believe that, but I kind of think that's true. I would also like to say about what just happened with the Artsakh War in the fall of 2020, that was hugely, I know it was devastatingly traumatic for people in Hayastan. I can also say that everyone that all the Armenians that I know here in New York and in the States, we were all absolutely, riveted, following the news, following the social media reports, following everything. And it really, watching the loss of that territory and the threat to those monuments and the churches and the monasteries, and, seeing people with their suitcases on the road. It was very, the word that is in vogue right now is triggering. That it triggered all kinds of anxiety and sadness and grief for everyone. And right. I know that it was by far the worst for the people of Artsakh, and then also for the people in Hayastan.